Our next speaker is someone who should be no stranger to the industry. He's been around for 25 years, Tom Samplonius. He is the VP at Urban Networks. And what did I do with his bio? I could do some of his bio myself, but it's better if I read his. So he's been involved for 25 years. He's a telecom technology and services specialist, including operations, hosting, data center, national IP networks, and PSTN. Tom has a unique combination of both carrier ISP experience plus facilities experience, including outside plant. He's been on the board of VANIX since May 2017. He's also the VP of Urban Networks, as I mentioned. And he's going to be talking to us about IPv6, a topic that has been discussed at every conference I've ever been to, I feel like sometimes. But I think as the price it continues to go up and up for IPv4, maybe there's finally a strong economic incentive to get us over the line. So looking forward to hear Tom's take on it. Coming up, Tom.
Hi, thanks everyone. My presentation is on what I think is sort of a new case for IPv6. Next slide, please. So I want to start off a little bit with what does VANIX do? VANIX is a not-for-profit internet exchange in BC. Internet exchanges are meeting points for networks to exchange internet traffic. It's known as peering, in order to reduce costs, increase performance, keep local traffic local, and also keeping Canadian traffic in Canada. I think a lot of the providers here are aware that sometimes traffic ends up Canada traffic ends up hairpinning through the US, particularly in BC. Seattle tends to carry an awful lot of Canada traffic. VANIX is working to keep that Canadian traffic in Canada and improves resiliency. Particularly BC, we sometimes have a harsh environment. We've got rock slides, floods. Having additional paths in the network is crucially important. And an internet exchange also provides that. It also can keep local connectivity working when sometimes out-of-region connectivity is really distressed because a rock slide has taken it out or something like that. So VANIX's impact. VANIX has actually been growing quite strongly. VANIX has doubled in size over the past 3 years, and VANIX is now exceeding 100 gigs of traffic peak almost every day. This particular graph is from Monday. VANIX has quite a large number of networks. It's just over 65 networks connected right now. And also as a nonprofit, our members are our networks as well. Like, not all networks choose to become a member, but membership is open to any network that connects to us, which gives them ability to vote at our AGM and so forth as well, and help guide the organization. It's a true not-for-profit versus some not-for-profits that are very restricted memberships. But there's a problem. Many smaller ISPs can't offload their traffic to VANIX because they don't own their own IPs. Basically, they don't have portable IPs. And another aspect, I wanted to put it out there because I know that I've talked to many small ISPs, and while it's not specific to portability, there's also a big challenge of physical interconnection. A lot of small ISPs that want to connect to a different network, they can't because it's just not cost feasible. It's a big topic in its own, and it probably deserves its own presentation. I just wanted to put that up there, so I'm wanting to be transparent that portable IPs isn't the only problem that's blocking small ISPs from peering, but there's also this other factor. But the routing problem also affects other Canadian internet startups. It's pretty hard to be a Canadian cloud startup or like even a Canadian CDN, like a content distribution network. If you wanted to start up one yourself, where would you get the IPs? And so this lack of portable IPs, it's limiting development of the internet in Canada. So what is the cause? I mean, everyone's seen this, I think, already. There's only about 3.7 billion IPv4 addresses. Those have to be divided over a population of almost 8 billion people globally. Nothing's really changing there. Also, but what's changed over the last few years is that some of the easy to obtain unused IP addresses have been gobbled up. Amazon, particularly as of 2020, has over 100 million IPv4 addresses. That IP address stockpile is worth about $2.5 billion. Most startups now would not be able to follow Amazon's approach because Amazon got there first. And obviously, once they have those IPs, they're not going to put those back in the market. Those are theirs from now on forever. So when you've got 3.7 billion getting carved up in all these different ways, it's a real challenge. Prices of IPv4 addresses are increasing at least 20% a year. I have a source here listed. It's actually hard to get real pricing on this because a lot of the pricing seems to be a bit self-serving because the sellers are trying to get you to buy now and so forth. But 20% I think is conservative. I've seen some numbers as high as 30%, varies year by year. So next slide, please. So IPv4 is not sustainable. Even if your business model can support it, eventually there won't be any addresses to get. Simple as that. So the answer is IPv6. I think everyone's heard that before. IPv6 provides a much larger address range. Trying to describe it, it's almost indescribable how big it is. Basically, the Earth could not support a population that could ever exhaust IPv6. I mean, that's a simple way of putting it. It's also relatively cheap. Canadian ISPs can get a /32 block, which would be at minimum enough for 64,000 subscribers. Depends how you slice it up. Using the ARN largest maximum block at 64,000, but reality is that you can get over 200,000 subscribers, and that's only for $1,000 US per year. And the savings are obvious. So what's been the problem, right? I mean, IPv6 has been here for 20 years. As Chris mentioned, every conference has talked about this. What's been so hard about it? Well, people go with what's familiar. The four numbers of the IP address, it's really baked into the average consciousness now. Everyone's seen an IP address. Maybe they don't know what that's called, but even down to your consumers, they're pretty familiar with it. IPv6 addresses look horrible in comparison, right? They're big and long because they're big and long. But also part of the similarity is that, one thing that has been mentioned at previous conferences is that, sometimes there's just a lack of talent as well in the ISP space, especially for rural startups. They can't get enough people. So trying to tackle an IPv6 rollout on top of all the other challenges that they have, it's too much. It's too difficult, and they can't get there. Now, also another problem is this IPv6 network conversion strategies. Over the last 20 years, there's been a lot of really crazy schemes for how to run IPv6 and IPv4 and provide crossover between the two different networks. And thankfully now, in 2022, a lot of the losers have been dropped, right? Things like, DS Lite and various tunneling strategies, they're all out, right? They just don't make sense for anybody anymore. And also, don't really say this in the slide, but, hardware support is a lot better. Residential gateways are better. BNGs are better. So going through some of those schemes, which really were workarounds more than anything, it's no longer necessary. It's fairly clean. You can get a residential gateway or a wireless gateway out of the box. And while it's not perfect, I'm going to say that, certainly a lot easier than it's ever been. And if you looked at this before and said, oh, I can't get all my equipment to talk to each other, it's definitely time to look at it again. And so deploying IPv6 in 2022. How should you do it? My strong recommendation is what's called dual stack. Run IPv4 and IPv6 together. All the customer equipment, like end customer equipment, like laptops and PCs, they automatically know what to do. They automatically select IPv6 when it's working or when it's available. I wouldn't say working, and they'll drop down to IPv4 when IPv6 is not available. And it's seamless. Like you go from web page to web page, the browsers just make IPv6 connections versus IPv4. It also fits with how a lot of ISP networks are working today, especially smaller WISPs. I haven't surveyed all of them out there, but I've surveyed a few, and a lot of them are forced to run NAT today, where they're doing network address translation because they've got a small block of external IPs. They got a bunch of customers that's more than that number. They're running network address translation already. And if you're doing that, it's fairly easy to layer IPv6 on top so that you can just have your IPv6 with real IP addresses, no translation. And for the NAT, the legacy IPv4, you can run it through your NAT gateway. But I admit this is not a full blueprint on how to roll out IPv6. There's going to be specific cases depends on your vendors and things like that as well. But dual stack has definitely emerged as a leading contender, and I think it fits particularly with what WISPs and wireline ISPs are doing today. Going back to what I mentioned right at the beginning of the presentation, is IPv6 also adds portability. Because rather than being trapped with your different IPv4 providers, whether it's leasing or buying and whatnot, you're going to be able to get portable IP addresses. You're going to be able to connect to multiple upstream providers, which wasn't going to be an option before. And of course, you can peer at an internet exchange. Next slide. Conclusions. Development of the internet in Canada is restricted by the availability of portable IPv4 addresses, which also restricts access to internet exchanges. So this has knock-on effects, including limiting resiliency and performance of the internet in Canada. And the solution is to deploy IPv6 parallel to IPv4, which has sufficient address space to give every current and new ISP in Canada as many portable IPs as they need for, it's actually got enough IP space that every ISP could serve every customer themselves. Specifically, I recommend dual stack to maintain access to the IPv4 internet until everyone moves over. I know there's going to be questions about adoption. IPv6, depending what sources you see, anywhere from 5 to 10% of internet traffic is IPv6, so it's a small number. But it's important to keep in mind that cellular networks are very much almost exclusively IPv6, like as far as different phones, when you check your phone, it'll actually have an IPv6 address because the cellular operators ran out of addresses a long time ago and switched over to it. In some cases, there's parallels there between that and a small ISP, but definitely there's going to be at some point a kind of a big bang here where there's going to be a mass jump off of IPv4, possibly when IPs hit $100 per IP each, possibly when the networks kind of reach maturity that all the IPv6 connections that have been built all of a sudden take a surge of traffic, but something's going to happen soon. And then finally, questions. Any questions about IPv6 internet exchanges?
Anybody? Yeah. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay.
I was thinking back to Chris's comment about how many presentations we've heard on IPv6. And one of the things that seemed to be holding back adoption was the number of internet sources that were still IPv4. So I went to look for the wall of shame. I couldn't find it. Do you remember that website? It listed what websites were still not on IPv6. Because as an ISP, if my customers can't get to Facebook, name the major websites, then we have to be dual stacked, which is your recommendation anyway.
Yeah.
But my question comes back to how many of the websites out there, the sources of our customers' data are V6? Is there a stat on that?
Yeah, it's very high at this point. It's very high at this point because a lot of large networks use content distribution networks as their front end to serve content, and content distribution networks like Cloudflare, Fastly, Akamai, they've been IPv6 for many years. Certain cases, they can even do stuff like V4 to V6 proxying for their customers that don't have IPv6 yet. So the capability is there, like Netflix, Google. One of the laggards has always been Amazon, but I believe Amazon's own Amazon.com website is now IPv6 as well. Amazon, of course, wasn't fast to move because they've got so many IPv4. I mean, quite honestly, they didn't. They felt it was sort of another weapon that they could use in the marketplace. But what's interesting, though, around mobile networks particularly, is what I'm seeing in the US at internet exchanges is that mobile networks like T-Mobile, for example, will not peer unless that network has IPv6, because T-Mobile's network is so IPv6 driven. And that's just one example of a cellular operator who's got such a dominant place in IPv6 subscribers. Cellular networks are almost exclusively IPv6 at this point.
Hi, thanks, Tom, for bringing this up again, because it does keep bear reminding it should still be at every conference.
Yeah.
And I've been looking at it recently, and this is less of a question as it is a comment. I've been looking recently at, and there's an excellent cost analysis on a Nano presentation, which you can find on the Nano YouTube channel, that shows what the return on investment is on an IP4 address these days. And prior to up until $10 per IP address per IP4 address on the resale market, it makes more sense to buy IP addresses. And between $10 and about $60 per IP address, it makes more sense. It's kind of it depends upon how much you spend on your IP6 and your CGNAT implementation. But beyond $60 per IP address, everybody should be, is going to wind up saying you're better off selling your IP4 addresses altogether and going entirely to IP6 and natting everything, because you're going to make a lot more money on selling your IP addresses than you are, trying to maintain an actual network for them.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question as well. There's definitely some organizations that are sitting on stockpiles of IPv4 addresses that were signed 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and they may be considering selling them. Now they're worth millions of dollars. Like, I know that there's a municipality in Metro Vancouver area that has a /16 block. It's probably worth $7 million right now. When they got it, it was worth nothing, obviously. But there's a few organizations out there that have sort of surprise assets in IPv4. But my point is that eventually those addresses are going to get consumed. Someone's going to snap them up. The next startup, the next big US company is going to roll in, buy them all. And what's going to happen to the small guys? They're going to be squeezed out.
Okay. Couple of things come to mind. One, is Aaron doing anything to cull the hoarding of IPv4 addresses, the way that it's gone on and now getting carried away, where Amazon can own 100 million?
A lot of it, you have to realize that there is a transfer market. There's criteria for doing transfers. The process, I find, is quite complex. Like, if you ever read into the Aaron stuff, it's very bureaucratic. If anyone has any questions about how to manage Aaron, just come to me afterwards or just send me an email. It's complex, but Aaron, one thing it comes always down to is justification. Amazon is the biggest, so they can always justify the need for those addresses. Mm-hmm. And that is a problem too, because the smaller ISPs are going to be looked at quite skeptically by Aaron. Aaron has actually had cases of fraud where someone's invented a whole bunch of ISPs, registered them, and then obtained addresses, and then Aaron has actually had to sue to get them back. So that's the problem. Amazon has no problem with proving need, they have no problem with funds, and they have no problems proving who they are. But those things all are disadvantaged to smaller ISPs. They're skeptical, like, do you really exist? You just registered last year. Are you a real ISP? Amazon doesn't face those questions. So that just actually puts more urgency on the problem.
Yeah, for sure. And another question, are you or are there other consultants that you could recommend available for ISPs if they want to move to IPv6 dual stack but don't have the knowledge? Is that something that...
best to just do, my email's on the final slide. I'm not sure how it's going to be distributed to the attendees, but just send me an email and I can make some recommendations. And I've got a few physical business cards as well. Rare in this day and age, but a few physical business cards as well.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.